So good morning, everybody, or good day, depending on your time zone, and welcome to the NOBL webinar on deep diversity. We are so excited to have everybody join us, and we're really looking forward to this conversation. Quick introductions. I am Paula Cizik, and I am the Chief Research Officer at NOBL. My job is essentially to go out and find new and emerging ways of working and help our clients adapt those ways of working to what they do. And joining me today is Kim Perkins. Kim is our resident chief behavioral scientist, essentially. She has a PhD in positive organizational psychology, and she's really excited. This is actually a topic that she came to me to talk about, and so she's thrilled to be here today. Kim also has a really varied background as an executive coach. She was an athlete prior to joining NOBL, and also got to be a, basically she worked on Weird Al's tour, one of his tours, which is honestly one of my favorite facts about her. Kim is also preparing to go to Burning Man in just a few days, which is why she's decked out like she is. But we thought it was really appropriate for a chat on deep diversity to have blue hair. So Kim, why don't I have you take it from here?
Thanks, Paula. That's a great rundown, and you got my fun facts in there. Okay, so I'm Kim Perkins, and as Paula said, my PhD is in positive organizational psychology, which is a strength-based way of looking at functioning in organizations. And so that's part of the way where we're going to go today with this presentation, is to think about diversity from more of a strength-based way. So as we get into it, first I want to tell you a little bit about NOBL and what we do here. So NOBL is a culture change agency. Oops. We consider that culture is the last sustainable competitive advantage. And so here are some of the things that we as a company have helped clients achieve through working on ways of working, culture, and doing it through the way the work gets done, rather than doing it as a separate add-on in terms of leader development. And so we find that when we get the ways of working right, that tends to make people, that tends to help develop leaders while we're at it. So we operate at the intersection of strategy and culture. So we are talking about org design. We work on change management initiatives, especially from the human side. We do leadership development, as I said, through the work that we're doing. And we work on new ways of working so that people can stay both up to date and maintain that competitive advantage in ways that make their culture right for their strategy, so that their ways of working can carry out the strategy that they've selected. So these are several different ways we get involved. We do embedded change projects, which means that we come to your office and coach you through the change process. There's a lot of consultants like to just slap a 100-page report on your desk and say, here's what you ought to do. Good luck with that. That's not how we do it. We like to come and help you implement, help you design and iterate as you're going all the way through the change, so that with our clients, we tend to find that people make it all the way through and get to the other side while we're still there, rather than having just knowing what they should do and then perhaps never actually doing it. We also design offsites. These are a great way to kick off change initiatives or to start with culture change. And we do training programs that are both in connection with those other two things and by themselves. So let's get started talking a little bit about diversity today. So when we're thinking about diversity, this is a difficult time to talk about it. It's a huge topic, it's polarizing, there's many different takes on it, and often there's a desire to be sort of more right about diversity and what we should do about it than the next person. So and at the same time, there's not a lot of exemplars. There's not a lot of people we can point to and say, this company is really doing it right. This area, this little isolated place is really doing it right. There's always things to critique, and there's always things that can be done better. And so I want to manage your expectations today, because I know we won't solve all the world's problems in today's seminar. And we may not even address some issues and perspectives that you may find important. But just because it's contentious doesn't mean that we really can step away from talking about it. So in the spirit of some of the things that NOBL stands for, which are being able to have difficult conversations, being able to manage out and work out in the open and have everybody feel like they've got a certain amount of psychological safety, that they can be themselves on the team. We're hoping to give you some useful points of view to work with and to fill in some gaps. And we're hoping that you come with an open mind and heart, and that's the spirit in which this is offered. So in today's agenda, we're going to talk about a couple of different types of diversity. We'll have a little bit of discussion about that, and we'll talk a little bit about team flow, which is the idea that teams are, when teams are working really well and everybody's feeling really good about what's happening, we call that team flow. And then we'll do a little Q&A at the end. So let's get started thinking about types of diversity. So one of the things we know about humans is that they like to be on the same page with one another. We've evolved in ways that make it very important to be able to tell who's on your team and who's not on your team. And we have a tendency to make those divisions. And we have a tendency to make those divisions very arbitrarily. We'll make them on the basis of small bits of culture, small differences between people. And and each of us is constantly evaluating how these things go. And at the same time, we also like to surround ourselves with people who are like us in ways that are important to us. We all have many multiple identities that we wear at any given time, and the ones that are most salient to us and the ones that are most important are the ones we really wish that other people would share. And according also to people's theory of mind, and what that means is that's the idea that you can understand what is going on in other people's mind. We have a tendency to project whatever's going on in our minds out onto the world, whether that's true or not. So if we find that people are different than us, it can often be jarring, but it can also be interesting and beautiful. And honestly, of course, that is the reality that we live with, which is that everybody, until we can clone ourselves and populate the planet with us, something I know Paula would like to do, then we are going to have to deal with people who are subtly and markedly different than us. So when we're thinking about this, it's important to think about two different kinds of diversity because they have different effects. So there's surface diversity and there's deep diversity. So surface diversity, obviously, is the things that you can see right away about a person. So when we're thinking about diversity in terms of demographics, that's often what we're thinking about. Age, gender, ethnicity, maybe. It's hard, increasingly in our world, as people become blended, it's often harder to tell what a person's ethnicity is just by looking at them. And in fact, 70% of the people who identify as mixed race in the United States are under the age of 25. So it's only going to get more so. And role also belongs to surface diversity at work because people's roles and their place in hierarchies are very salient to us, and that's something that we often take into account. So surface diversity is political a lot of the time, and this is where it evokes equity issues because there are historic imbalances in the amount of power that people have based on their surface characteristics. And whether that is something that is operating for you in your corner of the universe or not, that's something that everybody has to deal with. And so because larger systems don't tend to be just those overarching societal ones, people tend to see little cues about whether they're accepted or not as very big. And those tend to loom large in people's world. And then that can be depressing, breed mistrust, and ultimately turn into a feeling of a lack of justice in your corner of the universe. So when we think about deep diversity, on the other hand, we're thinking about the things that you can't see. We're thinking about thinking style. So perhaps, are you an ideator? Are you a person who prefers to carry out the work? Do you consider yourself a creative person or a person who really likes to execute? We're thinking about motivations. Are you really motivated by the rewards of work? Or are you more motivated by being able to carry out a mission that helps other people? Everybody's motivated by all of these things to some degree, but some people are more explicitly motivated by some than others. And that's a type of tension that we often see on teams where people who are mission-oriented have a bit of difficulty getting along with the people who are more financially oriented, for example, and that can cause conflict. This also comes up, deep diversity also comes up in terms of thinking about training. So I often joke that my husband and I are a very cross-functional team because he's an engineer and I'm a psychologist. So that means that we both have very specific and set ideas on how the dishwasher gets packed. and when the dishwasher gets packed. And what is the purpose of packing the dishwasher? Are we doing it to save water and conserve resources and be efficient? Or are we doing it so that people have dishes in the morning when they need them? So these are the kind of things that when you have people from different training, different backgrounds, that sometimes become salient and can become the source of conflict. And also experiences. And this is where it crosses a little bit with surface diversity, is that if people have very different experiences that are forming their worldviews on teams, then there often doesn't feel like there's room for all those experiences, or there will be such deep assumptions about the way the world works that it will feel like it's impossible to get on the same page. So you'll notice that there's only a tiny little overlap between these two in this Venn diagram. And that's purposeful, because humans, we see the surface characteristics and we think that because of that, we can predict the deeper characteristics. But actually, we really can't. A lot of the time, we only notice when our heuristics about a person, our idea of how they must be from their surface characteristics, we only really notice when they completely match the reality or when they completely contradict the reality of that person's individuality. So if people really defy your expectations, you notice, and if people really confirm your expectations, you notice. And that's only a very small amount of the time. Most of the time, it's sort of a mushy middle where we are doing things that are just what normal humans do and not really thinking about it, not really acting out of our identity. There's an idea about the fundamental attribution error. This is the idea that when I do something, I do it because I have reasons and it's situational. So when I'm driving too fast on the highway, that's because I have to get somewhere and I'm just responding to circumstances. As opposed to when we see other people speeding on the highway and we go, wow, that's them. They are so unsafe. They're just dangerous drivers. So there's a difference here where we attribute our own circumstances to circumstances around us, and that's why we do things, whereas we think that other people do things because of the way they are, and that's something that we need to watch out for ourselves when we're thinking about diversity, both surface and deep. But the thing is that diversity leads to two different kinds of outcomes. There's a tension here. So that we think that it's the surface diversity that is driving tension in teams, but actually as time goes on, surface diversity becomes less important in teams. And this is according to a meta-analysis of team performance that was done in 2009, where they looked at team performance in a variety of contexts and rated the diversity on teams. And this is, again, not necessarily surface diversity. This is more deep only. They also looked at deep diversity. And they found that teams with deep diversity, it became more important to their performance later, as opposed to right away. So right away, the surface diversity might be creating tension, but over time, it was the deep diversity that was actually guiding team performance. So there's also two different types of outcomes that are attached to these types of diversity. So when you have deep diversity, that leads to better decisions, more innovation, but it also leads to more conflict. So there are findings like less group cohesiveness and less information exchange. People don't tell you what's going on to the same extent when you're in a more diverse team. The same with organizational attachment. In a very diverse team, people tend to be less emotionally attached to the organization than they do on a more homogeneous team. And there's higher withdrawal behavior. People are checked out more, meaning if they don't feel safe, they really don't feel safe, and then they're just phoning it in. These are all things that you don't want, of course, that are outcomes that often happens with deep diversity, and the kind of things that I think people often feel while they're working on diverse teams. That they feel like there's a bit of a less trust there. There's not so much group cohesion. And at the same time, if you are going for more cohesion through having more homogenous team members where everybody pretty much thinks alike and is on the same page, that can feel really good in the moment, but it doesn't lead to as good outcomes. There tends to be less innovation. The products that emerge from that tend to be less robust. And often that has led to, we've seen in terms of governing boards, when there's less diversity, there are lower profits. There's more scandals. There's more ethical breaches because people are have a shorthand for what they think all being on the same page is like and what people will tolerate. And that tends to get stretched over time. And so what we would like to do, like this dog, is to be able to balance between getting the benefits of diversity and also, quite honestly, the reality that we live in a very diverse world, especially if you're living in a coastal city. If you don't have a diverse team, you're not trying very hard. And to also have the cohesion so that you can feel like you're all part of a group and you can get the benefits of team flow and high group cohesion without, at the same time. And that's kind of the brass ring that we're trying to grab here. So let's talk a little bit about team diversity and performance. So this is where it's time to go to a breakout room. And I would like to have you talk, when you get to this breakout room, I'd like you to talk about a time when you felt team flow. And by team flow, we think about this, flow is a state of peak experience where you're completely absorbed in an activity and it's going well, and that self-consciousness breaks down and you feel like you are in the zone. So I want to think about a time when you felt like you were in the zone with your team. This could be a work context, hopefully, could be a sports context, could be, but make it something where you are all in pursuit of a common goal and you're trying to do a thing. And I'd like you to think a little bit about what factors made that possible.
Hi, everyone. I shared with my team an experience that I had recently where myself and 5 direct reports presented to our North American leadership team. And a few of the people who were on my team had never done executive presentations. So it was a really nice opportunity for me to coach, as well as to kind of learn some of their presentation styles throughout the course of putting the presentation together. We had a lot of brainstorming sessions, a lot of discussions, a lot of arguments. But at the end, we put together something really kind of great and presented it to our North American executive team. And it was really awesome. They were very nervous on the first run through. And then after the first run through, they sort of got comfortable. And it was really nice to see everyone step up.
Nice. That's fantastic. Thank you, Joanna, for sharing that.
You're welcome.
You touched on a couple of the things that we definitely think about in terms of team flow. So when we're thinking about what it's like, we're thinking that everybody feels united. You know, they're kind of all moving toward the same goal. People have the same level of ambition, so that there aren't people who are just phoning it in and other people who are really going overboard to make this amazing. Everybody's pretty much on the same page with their degree of ambition. They know what they're trying to accomplish, and there's some unity around what some understanding of what everybody wants to get out of this and what good looks like. The other thing is feeling like you're making progress, so that you can see that's such a huge motivational factor for everybody individually. And part of group flow is feeling like the group as a whole is moving forward, that they're making progress, that you're getting better, that you're getting toward the milestone that you're working for. And the third thing is really that you trust each other to adjust on the fly. So that's kind of what one of the things that separates team flow from from other types of high performance, which is that everybody can adjust and get in there at the same time. And when it works beautifully, it's almost like people read your mind. I know that sometimes with Paula and my other colleagues at NOBL, I have an experience where I have forgotten the third thing while we're facilitating, and I shoot them a glance and they somehow magically know that I've forgotten the third thing and they step in. It's amazing. And so that way that people will have a seamless performance. And I personally love that. If you're asking me about a team flow experience, sometimes facilitating with my team is one for me.
Speaking of which, Kim, we actually have one more person who wanted to share. Excel, so hold on, I'm gonna unmute. All right, you're on.
Hi, Paula and Kim, thank you. So with my team, Rebecca and Becky, so we had 3 different examples, but we just came to that point where we were saying that clearing the expectation would bring everybody feel at the same level of confidence as each other. So so the team could work better if we were just working as equals.
Yes,
Voilà,
that's
that's
great.
all.
That's a great, great point. And it's a fantastic segue into the next part of team flow, which is what it takes to get to that place. And so that means what I think you're highlighting here is having different skills at the same high level, so that people have a certain amount of you know what you're bringing. You know, if you think about like a Star Trek type team, everybody's got their job that they're specifically good at, and they know how to do it. And even though they're a specialist over here, they can fill in for other people if absolutely necessary. You've got that open communication, so that, as both of you guys pointed out, if there's conflicts on the team, you can resolve them. And then there's a mutual commitment to the team, so that you can feel like everybody is trying to help each other out and nobody is trying to impede people for their own gain. And then finally, there's the idea of control and influence. So in individual flow, if you think about it from sports or from dancing or other kinds of peak experiences where we get completely immersed in an activity, what emerges there is this feeling of control. Like whatever happens, we can probably deal with it. We can figure out a way to adjust on the fly. And that's what I mean here by control and influence. So you can't always control it because it's more of a dance with circumstances. And certainly in all of our business lives and all our team lives, if only we could control all of the circumstances, and then we could have things work in the textbook manner they're supposed to. But of course they never do. So that idea of, if X happens, we will do Y. You know, if the vendor is late with the deliverable, then we will do this other thing, and we will be able to fill in for each other to make a seamless performance, is really part of team flow. And that's one of the reasons that people, all of these things, in fact, are part of the reasons why people often feel uncomfortable and less cohesion on a diverse team, because all of team flow is really predicated on being able to read each other's minds and understand how each other thinks. And that sometimes having deep diversity can make that a little bit harder. The good news is that there's actually a lot that you can do to overcome that and start to get people more on the same page and be able to understand people's thinking styles. A lot of times, so when we're thinking about what to do, a lot of times people think that if we just have everybody think the same way and have the same goals and values, that will be enough. That's when we end up with very homogenous teams. And it's true in hiring. It's there's a tendency to want to populate your teams with clones of yourself for this very reason, so that you can have shorthand. But it turns out that even though there are some circumstances where that is a useful tactic, most of the time that's not a useful tactic, and it's also not reality. Because then if you think everybody's on the same page and then you find out you're not, you're going to be in for a big shock. As opposed to what we recommend, which is actually getting to know about people's thinking styles, thinking about people's values, about what actually motivates people. And so when we're thinking about how to do this, what that often means is resolving conflicts, learning about people and resolving conflicts as a way through the conflicts that come with deep diversity, rather than just trying to be polite and stand on ceremony, which is what happens in earlier teams before they're super formed. So, you know, we always go through the idea of a team has different formation levels. So in the beginning, you're kind of coming in and everybody's very polite to each other. And then what happens after people get to know each other is you get a little bit more into the work, and then conflicts arise. And then with any luck, either the team disbands, which is not that often, but most of the time teams will try to figure out where everybody's at, what everybody's strengths are, how to work with everybody, and go on into the stage of high performance. So one way that you can hasten this is by getting curious. Get curious about what the differences are. So a lot of times, and I say a lot of times, but really this is a natural human tendency. We are judgment machines. We go around judging things all day and evaluating things all day, and that is our natural state of being. But what that doesn't have to be. We can decide to and opt into being curious about the things around us rather than having judgments about them. And when it comes to our team members, this is a really great thing to do, because it's going to be learning about how people do things and what people are responding to that is going to really help us get to team performance. So on remote teams, one of the ways that people do this is by playing games together. Not playing normal, like massively multiplayer games necessarily, but the idea of doing something that's kind of open-ended without a very clear goal, so that you can start to understand how people think and what their priorities are. So people do this in terms of like, let's have a group drawing session. Let's do some activities where we can kind of watch everybody and see what they do, so that we can get to know how they respond. And that addresses the deep diversity issue, so that if you can understand how people respond and what they're paying attention to and what their priorities are, that will really help you get into this team flow state better than knowing facts about them or knowing about their experiences, which are then subject to your judgment. So when we're thinking about this, we also want to think about getting at the assumptions, and that means, what are they responding to? So when people are looking at things differently than you, instead of going, that's a dumb answer, which we often do, right? Then the idea is to withhold that judgment, withhold your reaction to it, and try to say, so what makes you think that way? Where did that come from? What are you responding to? And so asking these open-ended questions to help get out of conflicts, so that it doesn't turn into my answer versus your answer. Because most of the conflicts are going to be at a deeper level. They're going to be, I'm seeing things that you're not seeing, and you're seeing things that the other person isn't seeing. So when you're entrenched, one of the things you can do is try this thing called paradoxical thinking. So this is a really interesting finding from conflict management. And this is, what we're trying to do here is to explain other people's point of view in a fairly extreme way. And we find that this helps people both grasp what other people might be responding to and get less emotionally attached to the whole thing, so that they can bring up conflicts without having it become personal or matters of identity. So in our next exercise, I'd like to try this out. And so I'm hoping you'll play along with me. So what we're going to do again is go into breakout rooms. And we're going to have one person at a time argue for and against a topic, so that when Paula, it may not be a bell, when Paula calls time, we would have you start, you might start off arguing in favor of dogs. And then when the bell rings, start arguing against dogs. And we want the same person to do this, because what this does is help detach people from their entrenched positions. So I will demonstrate. So I have two little kittens that are absolutely the light of my life, but I'm going to now argue for and against kittens. Okay.
All right. Do I put a minute on the clock, Kim? You want a minute?
You can put a minute in general, but I think what you should do is make it a little bit faster. So maybe you give me 30 seconds and then give me a time check, okay? And,
you got it.
All right.
On your mark, get set, go.
Kittens are the best. They're amazing little beings. They're little micro panthers. They're so cute. They have these little furry bellies, and they're terrible. My God, the litter box stinks so bad. I can't believe I let these animals into my house and tear up all of my furniture.
Change.
And they come up with their little paws, and they have little soft paws, and they just want attention and love. And then they really attacked my hair the other day, and I hated it, and I had to like disentangle them.
That's time. That was actually 30 seconds.
Yes.
31 seconds and change.
So it's a bit cognitively taxing, this game, but it's also a lot of fun. So what we'd like you to do in your breakout groups is to have a couple people go, and the other people can just cheer you on. Great job, everybody. We had some really fun stuff happen in my group.
All right.
So I'm thinking that if your group was like the group I was in, then it was a lot easier to go pro the things you like than it was to go anti them. But that it was something that people found were kind of a way to loosen up your thinking about it and develop empathy for the other side.
Yeah, so why don't we have, once again, if one or two people would like to share their experience or what they learned from that, again, you can either raise your hand or you can type in the chat box, and I will go ahead and unmute you. All right, go for it, Michelle.
Hello. I found, because for certain ones like dogs, I was trying to think of like, how are people going to argue against dogs, and especially chocolate too. Like summer was an easy one, but it was interesting to hear people argue against dogs, and it was interesting. And something I thought of too was like, oh, there's allergies and things like that. So my like thought process like shifted because of that. And it's like, oh, there are things that could be argued against dogs and chocolate. So it was interesting. Yeah, for certain ones, I think I had initial biases about like, you know, which were going to be easier to argue for or against, and then kind of changed as the session went on.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, and that's a part of the point of this exercise. It's not so that you change your mind. It's not so that you become less attached to the things that are important to you, or so you fight for them less, but it's so that you can understand other people's viewpoints and what people might be responding to. And therefore, because the ultimate goal here is that everybody gets to have their full humanity, and that nobody becomes just a collection of arguments or reduced to a stereotype about where they're coming from. And even, you know, with however that may play out on the political stage, when we're one-to-one with people and we're all striving toward the same goal, that is one of our levers for helping figure out where other people are coming from, and therefore how we can either get them understand a point where we can negotiate something that will work for both of us, or get them persuaded over to our side, instead of just saying, well, isn't it obvious? Summer's fantastic, which is never convinced anybody. So thank you for playing. So the other thing I want to just note quickly here is that there's a lot of really, as you can imagine, there's a lot of really interesting research coming out these days about persuasion and persuasion from a political and moral viewpoint. And one of the things there is that you can't tell people what their values ought to be. You can only demonstrate how what the thing you want them to do helps them get the values that they want. And most persuasive messages go through the values of the other person, not necessarily your own values. So if you were going to argue, trying to get somebody on board to, you know, not have summer, not that you can do that, but, you know, not go somewhere really hot for the company offsite, for example, then you could, rather than telling them necessarily all the things that are wrong with it, you would make an appeal to their values about, I know you really like being outside and having a lot of comfort there. What if we go somewhere that's like a nice spring, or go somewhere that is winter but has saunas, or something like that, so that you're speaking to the things that are actually valuable to them, rather than telling them why you are right and they're wrong. So let's move on to another topic. So we're here we're thinking about surface diversity. And so a lot of times people have heard this term microaggressions, and this is something that comes up about team functioning a lot, because people who are in stigmatized groups are often very sensitive toward microaggressions. And microaggression is a small like cultural tell or an insinuation that makes people feel as though they're not part of a group. So, and people who are in stigmatized groups feel these all day long. And we're, you know, we all have multiple identities. So chances are good that we can be a member of one stigmatized group and also a member of groups that don't have as much stigma. But if you're feeling excluded in a certain way, then that is because, often it's because there's been a microaggression that you feel excludes you. So sometimes this shows up in work teams is not being listened to, not being given credit for ideas, or having the idea out there that people like you can't progress in the organization, or can't take on an outside client role, or do something that you otherwise would want to do. So this is, so microaggressions are everywhere. And a lot of, when we're talking about diversity, the idea has been to reduce microaggressions by educating people, so that people know what might be sort of traumatizing for people, or what might give them a reaction that makes them feel they're not included. So that is one of the dominant ways people are doing that right now, but I want to offer some other ways besides education that might help people move forward. And so when we're thinking about diversity, a lot of times people are thinking about rules, like don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And although that's very helpful in education, that's not really an end in itself, because then people don't feel that level of comfort and unself-consciousness that is really critical to team flow. And so, and then instead of thinking about it in terms of rules, it would be it's also important to think of it really in terms of justice. Organizational justice has been studied in organizational psychology for a long time. And this is basically a feeling, a perception that the organization or the team is going to treat you fairly based on principles rather than based on favoritism or who you are or what you bring to the company. And so a lot of the ethical breaches we've seen around diversity have really been breaches of organizational justice. And even though there will always be people who are going to be more educated about what might be triggering to people and have better habits about what conversational rules people might have, it's the overarching idea here is to get people thinking about how to make things just and fair, and how to help give everybody what they need, rather than make a set of rules that everybody now has to follow so that people can be called out if they aren't following them. So this is my proposal to you, that as work evolves, we can't always do things about the justice in the larger world, but we can try to maintain justice and empathy in the worlds we live in our small worlds at work. And my experience is that has a ripple effect, and that is what we can do. Oops, that is my timer to tell me that we've hit the 50-minute mark. So as you can, when you're thinking about justice, really what you're talking about is individual consideration, being able to see people as individuals, as collections of identities, both surface and deep. And so in order to give people individual consideration, which is a big part of transformational leadership, which we consider the leadership style that works best these days in organizations. And that's one where you are trying to role model the behaviors you want and develop people, focusing on developing people so that they can become leaders in their own right. It's important to just be aware of these things. So read the context and body language of the people around you. Be aware of the power you hold. And that means whether it's you feel like it's a little or you feel like it's a lot, it's important to get in touch with the power that you actually do have in the situation so that you can handle it well. Appreciating the differences between people. So understanding that people, instead of questioning or judging people's experiences, to try to understand them and see where they're coming from. And generally, this will help you use your powers for good. So when we're thinking about as an antidote for microaggressions is microinclusions. One of the most popular ones that is very effective for this, has been well studied, is like the credit echo. So a lot of times, for example, certain people, when in meetings, don't always get credit for the ideas in the way that other people do. So if somebody has raised, if Paula has said, I think we should have pizza for lunch, and nobody really notices, and then 2 minutes later another member of the team says, yes, pizza for lunch, and it goes, yes, with pizza, definitely. What that person can do is say, as Paula said, we should have pizza for lunch. And that way people start to get a sense of people contributing, and Paula feels heard. You can also do things like letting people go first who don't usually do that. We often do that when we facilitate meetings. We do rounds, and this way people don't just defer to the senior leaders, but actually give people who are more junior or who may have ideas that are different from the senior leaders, they can go first, and those ideas can get out in the room rather than having groupthink just dictate everything. Asking open-ended questions. If you've been through any coaching programs or you know about the power of open-ended questions rather than close-ended questions to get at what's going on for people and to understand better, and that will create empathy. So rather than having the reaction to something, be getting curious. And allowing people to choose how much they're going to interact. So one of the hardest things that I've found in working with teams, as far as deep diversity, is when some people on the team are real people and want to be very close to each other and feel like we understand each other as humans, and other people really don't, and they really just want to come in, do their job, and leave. And that's a piece of deep diversity that is often hard to understand. But you can still have that and get team flow if you're allowing people to choose how much they engage. And not, people often misunderstand a lot of people-oriented interventions as being something like, when we're gonna make everybody share and it's gonna be so awesome. Please don't do that. Please allow people to choose how much they're going to share, and not make everybody get positive, share, get their goals, and control how people are thinking. And these are ways to make things more inclusive. So if you'd like to go a little bit deeper into this topic, here we have, go to our Academy site. There's a lot more on diversity besides this article, and you can scroll down, subscribe to our newsletter, and there's a lot we could talk about here. Paula, you have anything else to add here?
Not really. I just would like to say, we'll stick around. We've got maybe like 1 or 2 minutes for questions after this. But we really do want your feedback. So if you want, you can always reach out to us at heart, that's HEART, at nobel.io. Visit us at academy.nobel.io. And like I mentioned, we will be sending out video and slides to all of the participants in the coming weeks. So if you didn't get all your notes taken, don't worry, you will get them in your inbox. All right, so if that's all, maybe if we have time for questions, what you can, we've got Tracy Peaver. Hold on just a second. If I can actually have you just type it into the group chat, and then we'll have Kim address that. So if anybody has questions, like I said, type them into the chat box. We will select a couple, and we'll get you on your way. I know it might take everybody a minute or two, but yeah, any questions, feel free to type it into the group chat box. Okay, so this is Tracy's question. What is a good strategy for mirroring back when a microaggression is happening?
What a great question. So I'm assuming you mean when somebody is, you're the target of a microaggression rather than when you're witnessing this. I guess I can address both of those. So yeah. So if you're the target of a microaggression, it's, this is tough to say, and I'm going to say this as a person who also experiences a lot of microaggressions, but it may not be about you, and you need to choose whether you're going to address that head on or whether you can address that in a more deflected way. So one of the difficulties of this period in time we are is that people are very unaware of the actions, how their actions are hitting other people. So, however, because these surface diversity characteristics are kind of a function of political power, and there's a lot of history there. If one group is unaware of what they're doing, that can really hit the other group hard. And the tendency is to want to say, to educate them, and to want to educate them in a very direct way. And sometimes that works, but sometimes that doesn't really work that well, because that, as you know, that can kind of backfire. So I don't want to suggest that people laugh it off or just take it. But if, I would say that a lot of times this can be something that could be feedback for a time when there's immediate and when you have a moment to actually process the feedback. So I'd avoid lashing out if you can. If you can't, I totally understand. But what I would recommend is putting this as a piece of feedback, so that you can correct them on why that is hurtful to you, and owning it yourself. Saying this, rather than making it about, you should not talk about people this way, saying, when you said X, it had this effect on me of Y, and then like you did not do that. And again, it sucks that it has to be on us to defend our own microaggressions, but sometimes we have to do it because that's how the world changes.
And what about if you're not the one who experienced the microaggression personally, but you saw somebody else committing a microaggression on a third party, for instance? How would you go about giving them that feedback? Same principle?
Based on the literature, then sort of making it about, in a way, making a joke out of it and making it at that person who's doing the microaggression's expense has been shown to work better than like suddenly getting all serious and protecting that person. So it might be something like, oh man, Dave, I can't believe you would say that. Everybody knows that blah, 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 right? So that there's some playful shame in that. And that, according to research, tends to work a lot better, because it's also about, because now what you've done is you've flipped it so that it's about the person who's committing the microaggressions inclusion in the group. And therefore you have kind of wrapped your arms around the person who is at risk of being excluded.
Great, thank you. We have time, I think, for one more question. This is from Sean. I like this because I certainly know what this is like. So when I host team dinners, I like playing get to know you games, and one person on my team doesn't love them. Should I stop doing them?
No, you shouldn't. You're completely allowed to do that, but you just have to give the other person a chance to opt out, right? So if they hate them, they need to be able to not participate, or you can give them another role perhaps. So one thing I have seen done on teams is to give that person who doesn't like doing this, like answering, they get to ask the questions. And that way, basically what we're doing with inclusion is trying to find a way to participate without actually making people do things, making people share more than they really feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah. I've actually asked Kim about this because I am the person who's a little cynical when it comes to the team building activities. And so I actually asked her to do some research into this. And basically what's more important is not the game itself, but the willingness to participate and the willingness to engage with your colleagues. Did I summarize that right, Kim?
You did a great job, Paula.
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right. Stars all around. All right, so that's all the time we have for today, everybody. Once again, really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to come join us. If you have any further questions or follow-up, again, feel free to reach out to us, heart@nobel.io. But otherwise, we'll be sending out the recordings and the slides later this week. So we hope that you put them to good use and encourage deep diversity in your own teams. So thanks again, and we'll see you around.